Welcome. We're going to talk about Lesson 1.1 from your Pre-Algebra text. Lesson 1.1 is titled Variables and Expressions. And you can follow along in your textbook if you have it home with you. Otherwise, just follow along with the video. So let's talk about variables and expressions. Okay, first of all, expressions are things that you see all the time in mathematics. They're just anything like 3 plus 5. 4 times 6. Anything written down without an equal sign is an expression. Okay? Now, if all you have in your expression are numbers, then it's a numerical expression. So those examples I just gave, anything like 3 plus 5, 4 times 6, 28 divided by 7, that's a numerical expression because it's an expression with nothing but numbers. Okay. Now, a variable expression, on the other hand, will have at least one variable in it. That's all there is to it. So something like x plus 7 is a variable expression because while it has numbers in it still, it's got a plus, minus, divide, anything like that is fine. It also has a variable. Okay, so real simple. If it has a variable, it's a variable expression. If it doesn't, it's a numerical expression. Okay, let's talk a little bit about variables. Now, your textbook is going to say that a variable is a letter that stands for a number. And that's fine. And usually, we do use variables that are letters. For instance, we use x and y a lot as variables. But I want you to think back for a second. You've actually been dealing with variables for a very long time. I want you to go all the way back to probably kindergarten or first grade, and you were probably doing a math sheet that probably said something like this. Okay, that probably looks familiar. It might have been on a worksheet, might have been in a workbook, you might have done it on the board. And so what this expression says is 1 plus, I like to call this thing a happy box, equals 3. And your job way back when in first grade was to say, what number goes in for this symbol, in this case, this happy box, to make this true? And we all know that if we put 2 in for the happy box, that 1 plus 2 equals 3. When you did this, you actually were solving your very first algebraic expression. So we're going to be spending most of this year dealing with various aspects of algebraic expressions and solving them. Now, they're not all going to be this easy, but this is not a brand new idea that you haven't seen before. Okay? So when we talk about an algebraic expression, we're talking about nothing more than the combination of a variable or maybe a couple of variables. For instance, we could just as easily have had x plus y up here. That is also a variable expression that uses 2 different variables. Okay? But all you need to remember is a variable expression is an expression that has a variable. Now, when we take a variable expression and set it equal to something, now we have not an algebraic expression, but an algebraic equation. Okay, so that's just a quick introduction to some terminology that we're going to be using. Okay, now what do you need to be able to do in this unit? You need to be able to write variable expressions. So, for instance, if I tell you orally that I'd like you to write down an algebraic or a variable expression for 4 more than x. Well, 4 more than x. You would start with x, and 4 more than x means we're talking about x plus 4. On the other hand, what if I ask you to write down a variable expression for 4 less than x? Well, again, start with x. This time we're taking away 4 less than x. Okay, similarly, if I asked you for 4 times x, you could do something like this, using the dot for multiplication, or you could use a little asterisk here for multiplication. I think right away you're going to see the pitfalls of using the old x multiplication sign times x. That looks like 4xx. We don't really want that. So what we're going to use instead for this year, we're going to get rid of the x as a multiplication sign, and we're going to either do an asterisk like so, or we could have a dot. Let's make that a little bit darker so you can see it a little bit better. That means 4 times, this means 4 times x, this means 4 times x, and actually just putting a number and a variable next to each other, it's automatically implied that's what's happening right here is multiplication. So again, if you need to write a variable expression for a a phrase that is either given to you orally or in a book, this is what we're talking about. Let's go ahead and put one more in here. What if I wanted to write a variable expression for x divided by 4? Well, again, you could write that two different ways, correct? We could write it as x divided by 4 like that, or we could write it as x over 4. And you might also be tempted to write it like this. And again, for similar reasons as we just discussed up here, this is going to be a notation that we're going to try to stay away from. We'll talk more about that in class. So if we're trying to write the algebraic expression for x divided by 4, either this or this would be perfect. Alright, now moving on. What about just writing expressions in general? Not all expressions are going to be variable expressions. For instance, I think we all are expected to know that there are 12 inches in a foot. Alright, so if I asked you to write down an expression for how many inches there are in 3 feet, well, 3 feet would be 3 feet, and we know that each foot is 12 inches. So an expression to compute how many inches are in 3 feet would be 3 times 12 inches. And of course we could evaluate that and say, well, that's 36 inches, Mr. Gunn. And that is correct. This would be the answer that we're going to get. But this thing right here this thing right here is an expression for finding that 36 inches. Okay? Similarly, let's say we did days in the week. Again, we all know that there are 7 days in a week. So if we wanted to figure out how many days there are in 4 weeks, well, then we just take 4 weeks. Each week has 7 days, and so 4 times 7 is a numeric expression for computing how many days there are in 4 weeks. Okay? And of course we know the answer to that is going to be 28 days. Now, what if I don't tell you that I want to find out how many days there are in 4 weeks? What if we don't know how many weeks? What if I ask you in general, suppose you have X weeks. Alright? How many days are there in X weeks? Well, think about what we just did. When there were 4 weeks, we took 4, the number of weeks, and we multiplied by 7. So what we're going to do in this case is we are going to take X weeks, and again, we don't want to use that time sign because we're dealing with a variable here. So let's go ahead and use the dot. And so we're going to say, how many days are there in X weeks? Well, there's X times 7. Now that's a variable expression, and we don't know exactly what it equals because it depends on what X is. If X was 1 week, it would equal 7 days. If X was 4, just like the example right above, it would come out to be 28 days. If X were 10, obviously we would get 70 days. So when we write expressions, sometimes we're going to be writing expressions with known quantities. How many days there are in a week. Okay? How many inches there are in a foot. Sometimes we're going to be writing expressions with variables. So yes, we know that there are 12 inches in a foot, but if I give you m feet, well, we could take m times 12, and we would have m times 12 inches in those feet. So sometimes our expressions will involve variables, and sometimes they're just going to involve numbers. And again, going back to our terminology, an expression that only has numbers in it, like 4 times 7 right here, is a numeric expression, and one with a variable is a variable expression. Okay, so really quick, that's an introduction to variables and expressions. We're going to practice these in class. If you have any questions, you might want to rewatch a few parts of this video. Otherwise, I will see you, and we will go over some written work in class to make sure that we understand this concept. Thank you very much, and talk to you tomorrow.